We need to have a historian react to the way the Economist played. I am the historian and the Economist. I'm not going to unpause. I've got to find a way to reconcile this map with history. Now, it's important to know when we are doing historical simulation gaming, the further away we get from the start date, the wilder history will become. This has been known since the 70s or 60s even. We just know that if we allow the time clock to run, things are going to go off the rails. If you've played enough games of EU4, you know what I'm talking about. So what we have here, this is 1845 though, and already I've got a North German Federation when historically it did not form until after the Austro-Prussian War, and Austria was forced as part of the peace agreement to withdraw its influence from Greater Germany, and that allowed Prussia to then go and form the North German Federation. So how can it form so soon? Were there forces in place that were pushing Germany together? And were there forces that were keeping it apart? We want to take a look at each of those and then think what could have been happening that, although not historical, nevertheless presents a path that would be historically plausible. That's what we want in a historical simulation. We want something that would be historically plausible and not a situation where you're going like, okay, so you're telling me that you're running the islands of Ryukyu and you conquered the entire world? Not historically plausible. But EU4 let me do it. Yeah, not historically plausible. Stop. Just because EU4 has a focus tree that's way overpowered doesn't mean it's historically plausible. What do we have here? All right. Let's first consider the Concert of Europe, because that's a foundational principle at the beginning of Victoria III. The Concert of Europe was something that Prince Metternich of Austria created after the Napoleonic Wars to make a balance of power within Europe. There were three really big powers: Russia, France, and England. Austria was another big power, and Prussia was the smallest of the big powers. France had been taken down by a significant set of pegs, and Austria felt itself to be in that third position, along with England and Russia. What Austria wanted to do was preserve Austrian territory. When we look at Austrian territory, it's best to look at it with the the culture view active. Because this tells an important story about the Austrian Empire. You've got a German core in Austria proper, Bohemian Moravia or Czech, the Slovak territories, the Hungarian ones. You have the Transylvania area that's split between Hungarian and Romanian. You have the East Galicia, which is both Polish and Ukrainian. Call it Ruthenian, if you will. We have a Serbian population. We have Croatian. We have Slovene. We have Italian. We have the Montenegrin population down here. These all have different languages, different cultures, different religious leanings. All of this goes to serve the the Austrian Empire. It's not Austro-Hungarian yet. But there's one fear that as Napoleon talked about revolution, the Austrians did not want revolution to be hitting their country, because it would mean the end of a king, and it would mean most likely the end of Austria. We already have patriotic feelings. We come to call those nationalist as the patriotic calls come to become the formation of a nation. But already there are people in Italy for hundreds of years who felt that Italy should be unified and not a bunch of diverse little states. Machiavelli wrote about this in his day. The Germans feel like there should be something to this nation. We used to have a Holy Roman Empire that united all of Germany. Yeah, it was a loose confederation, but still it was a united one. Napoleon destroyed the Holy Roman Empire. What is there that's German about things? They wanted that. And in Austria, they don't want a situation where all the non-German groups that are not running things decide that they want to run things either on their own or as a power sharing area, and that simply is too revisionist for them. The Russians also don't want to see national or patriotic groups go forth. They've got their share, as you can see there, the Ukrainians, Belarusians, the Baltic states, the Finns, the Poles, and then we go out into the Caucasus and get some more different groups there. So all these do not want to see nations forming. They want to remain an empire that's over a lot of nations. And this is an ancient concept where you have nations that are not defined by a nationality. They're defined by fealty, that regardless of your language or religion, you owe something to the guy above you. And that's, you serve the guy above you. And because of that service, you toe the line and you follow along and you don't break away. And, and this is how empires are formed, out of multiple kingdoms. The emperor doesn't care if the kings do other things as long as they deliver taxes on time and they're loyal and they instill loyalty in their peoples. We're good with that. The Byzantine Empire was not just all Greek. It had lots of other groups in it. The Mongol Empire, it was an empire over many different peoples, and so on and so on. So the Austrian Empire wants to preserve that ancient idea, and patriotic feelings amongst its subject peoples trouble that idea. And it's the same in Russia. The Germanies, and that's what they were called, the Germanies, because they're multiple little nations, they had an opposite problem. They were not all the same people. They were different people trying to find a common identity. Prussia was different because, as you can see, Prussia takes in a big slice of Poland and has a large Polish population. And indeed, when we look at the borders of Germany, let's take a look at that. We bring up our culture view, nation formation, hover over Germany. Everything that's in green outline or red, green and red, is considered to be part of Germany. But the North German Confederation did not include the territories of Silesia, Posen, or East or West Prussia. It did include Pomeranian, Brandenburg, and Sachsen, and down to Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden. So the German Confederation contained those states. The Prussian and Polish territories of Prussia were outside of that, and within Austria, most of Austria was excluded from that as well. And although there were notions of forming a Großdeutschland out of all of Austria and all the Germanies somehow unifying, that really wasn't realistic because of the tensions that are extant within the Austrian Empire. It's going to be much more easier to unify North Germany under Prussia with this little Polish bit here than it is for Austria to extend its leadership all through South Germany and North Germany and then bring along the rest of the Austrian Empire. Not easy to do. So anyway, back to the concert of Europe. We've got to get back to that. Metternich, along with Russia and every other European nation, agrees that we want to keep things stable. We don't want these borders to be redrawn. That was the whole point of the Napoleonic Wars. Redraw the map of Europe. And any time somebody talks about redrawing a map, it goes against this concert of Europe ideal. So in the concert of Europe, Prussia is given some territories, so it's aggrandized because of its contribution in the Napoleonic War, and different groups there. So, but the idea being that Prussia and Austria will share Germany. It's a very powerful region. Austria wanted there to be lots of little Germanys, like Bavaria, Württemberg, Hanover, Saxon, the Hessian states, have all those little states there, because that way they could unify against a French threat. They could unify for defensive purposes, but it would be very difficult to unify them for an offensive purpose. They would quarrel amongst themselves and never agree to do anything. And because of that, they would not be a threat to Austria. As for Russia, if they chose to expand, Prussia and Austria are right there on the frontier. They're the strongest nations militarily. They could defend against that. If it was Russia and France attacking them, well, Prussia and Austria would work together and probably also get the British to join in because the British don't like the French. This is a historical theme that even when they're allied with each other, the British don't always get along swimmingly with the French. The French were just trying to negotiate their way out of complete division and being sliced up, and they wanted to preserve their country. But after that dust cleared, the French did look to getting a little bit of revenge. They wanted to see Austria taken down a peg. They wanted to see England taken down. They wanted to see Russia taken down. Germany, why take them down? They're already split up. But rather than take them down, take some of them. The idea of France's natural borders, including the Rhineland and this Nordrhein province and the Rhineland here, the Saar, and then also Belgium and Luxembourg and a little bit of, everything south and west of the Rhine, the French said, that is a natural border. It should be part of France. And there was a question within the far western parts of Germany. Do they want to be unified under Prussia, completely independent, unified under Austria, or unified under France? And even though some of them didn't want to be part of Prussia or Austria, they certainly didn't want to be French. Now, there are also people there who had French sympathies, but by and large, most of the people in this region did not want to be ruled by the French. And they felt that if they couldn't stand on their own, then of the other two alternatives, Prussia would be better than Austria. And that's why you see these states colored Prussian at the beginning of the game, and they're not in revolt. And they don't go in revolt because they realize their destiny lies with Prussia, more so than it does as a divided nation. Austria's view would be this way, that with a split up Germany, it could absorb shocks from different directions and not give in. It was defensive only. Within Prussia, they did not necessarily want to unify because in some ways, they looked down on other German states. Or in other cases, they were realistic about their chances that if they did start to unify, Austria would be opposed to that. Russia would be opposed to that. France would be opposed to that. And that's 3 enemies. Britain could also be opposed, and that's 4 big enemies on one major power that's the most minor of the 4 majors. They also had a situation at the start of the game where the Prussian army was not what we think of it. We think of the Prussian army as very tough, professional. That came later. That came later. There were reforms that were undertaken in the 1860s and late 1850s under Helmut von Moltke and Albrecht Roon. Now, these are 2 historical generals you'll see in Victoria 3. Von Roon and von Moltke were both innovators and reformers of the Prussian military. Prussian arms up to then had not performed well in battle. They were mostly reservist. They had some small cadres of active troops, and then when they called up the reserves, they would flesh out the troops and then go forward into battle and get beaten. They lost the first Schleswig-Holstein war because of this problem here. They also learned from the Crimean War how war had been changing, and that having a steady group of troops that were training longer and staying in uniform longer would be an improvement over the largely reservist-driven group. And that this reservist group would also be where, if you were in the army and you were a reservist, you had a very long time commitment there. You may be working as a shopkeeper or as a clerk. If you got called up for duty, you would question, is my job going to be there when I get back? Because that's what I want to be doing. This war is not going to be forever. And that impacted morale. You also had people who would pay for a replacement and then evade service. So a large part of the population had never been exposed to military duty. And the Prussians felt that military duty should be a responsibility that every adult male discharges early on in life. You go to school, you graduate from school, you do your military duty, then you go into the business world or whatever world you're going to go into, you go into that world, but you've done your military duty. You have that experience. Now, they would keep some other soldiers on as officers, and they would remain in the military as a career, but you would have a constant flow of new recruits that would come in, get trained, be there for a number of years, then go on. And one of the reforms they had was to extend that military duty from 2 to 3 years and get it to where no one would be exempt from it. Everyone would go through the duty, and then everyone would be subject to a shorter period of reservist work. So that way you didn't have these 40 and 50-year-old reservists when you could be recruiting 20 and 19-year-olds to come into the Army. They didn't like having those old guys when they could have had younger fellows. Because as an older guy, I know I can't do as much as a younger guy can. and the Army guys knew that as well. So they're trying to reform the Army. What else is happening in Europe? Belgium breaks away from the Netherlands in 1830. There's a border change. And this rocks a little bit here because the Netherlands were supposed to be another wedge between Germany and France. And with Belgium breaking away, there was a risk that France could take Belgium or that a unified Germany could take Netherlands. And of the two, France taking Belgium seemed more likely. But because Belgium got guarantees from England and France about its territorial integrity, they were able to, keep that from being too much of a worry. But a bigger worry was when Poland broke away from Russia in 1830. That was scary because there's a lot of Austria that was Polish, and the Ukrainian part of Austria, they felt like the Poles did. Whether or not they're going to stay with Poland later on, that's their business. But if the Poles are revolting, the Ukrainians also like to revolt. That's a problem. And Germany has big parts of either predominantly or high minority Polish population. They didn't like that either. There was an expression in Victoria II that, or a quote Victoria II that I wish they would feature more here, where the powers that rule over Poland would say, Poland shall be kept off the map. No, we do not want a Poland, because it would break their nations up. And that's why the Poles saw themselves as the Christ of nations. They had been killed off, but they would rise again. Aha, the Christ of nations, it will rise again. So that's why Poland is an important piece of this puzzle here. But that Polish revolt was something that really scared Austria. They did not want to see that happening. It's right there on their border. They've got people that would go for it, and if those guys left, they would have other groups ready to go as well. But let's go back to that again. The Polish had a national rebellion in 1830. This is well before people or nations are discovering nationalism or pan-nationalism in the Victoria III tech tree. Patriotism is already a powerful force. Nationalism is going to amplify that patriotism. As other nations talk about forming their nations based on their people, people without nations will say, if you can do it, so can we. The logic applies to everyone. And this is where nationalism becomes a much more dangerous and volatile political force. It's already there. It's going to get worse. All right. So we have this Empire of Austria, and in this playthrough, it launched an attack against Germany for domination of the Germanies. It wanted that dominion there. Why would it do that? Why would it do that? We have no other wars going on, and it makes that play. This is something Metternich did not want to have happen. Even Bismarck did not want to have a Großdeutschland. When, after Prussian arms were very victorious in the uh, Austro-Prussian War, the Kaiser Wilhelm was saying, "Let's drive on to Vienna, take it over, and we will bring them in by force." Bismarck said, "I will resign as your chancellor if you do that." That was Bismarck's way of saying, "No, this is a terrible idea, because if Germany does form that way, the rest of Europe will attack it, because that is too strong a nation." That's something that's missing in Victoria 3, by the way. There, there needs to be more than just infamy for making other nations want to attack a nation. There needs to be something that says your nation is getting too big or is about to get too big or something about that. And it's not just infamy, it's not just relations. There needs to be another barometer where the the AI realizes that the balance of power is in jeopardy, and if they don't move now, they're going to get dominated. And in that context, Bismarck was right to say to Wilhelm, "Do not do this. I will resign. You'll have to explain it, not me. You will explain it." And by Bismarck saying, "I will resign," was telling the emperor, "You're going to," or the king, he wasn't emperor yet, he was king, you're going to get attacked by everybody else. Just saying. And King Wilhelm agreed, "I'll back out." He didn't become Kaiser until after 1871, and then he wasn't the emperor of Germany, he was the German emperor. Different. That way you don't enrage other parts that haven't yet been integrated into Germany. But I digress. We have Austria attacking Germany in 1844. What would make them think that that calculation was the right thing to do? Well, obviously, Metternich would have to be out. Let's say he has a stroke or dies or debilitating accident, something. Metternich is out of the picture. He falls out of favor. I don't know, but he's out of the picture. Two, the Austrian emperor, and he was an emperor, so he is a Kaiser. The Austrian emperor would have had to been thinking something is happening domestically that requires me to make this move to take all of Germany or to have dominance over all of Germany. The Austrian military was built to hold the empire together. They knew that was their primary role. Russia really wasn't going to attack them. They don't share a border with any other great power. The Ottomans had come to an agreement. They had a nice cordon sanitaire where they patrolled the border and they didn't cross it. It was better that way. In fact, in the Crimean War, the Crimean War, by the way, wasn't just in Crimea. The Crimean War started because of two reasons. One, there was the question over who was going to guarantee the safety of the Christians in the Holy Land. And the Russians had the Orthodox leadership there get primacy over the Catholic and Protestant leadership. And when the Ottomans were vacillating on that and were talking about giving some benefit to other Christian groups, the Russians were very offended and said, "That's a reason we need to go to war with the Ottomans." But deeper than that was the Tsar, Nicholas, wanted to have the Slavic nations in the Balkans freed from Ottoman dominance. Again, this is before we have nationalism spread far and spread wide, but we see this patriotism, this national ideal coming into play. And here it's Tsar Nicholas I saying, "Let's get the Bulgarians free. Let's add to the Serbian territory. Let's free some more Greeks." The Russian party in Greece was very strong. They stood to benefit from this. And the idea would be to take all of this European area of the Ottoman Empire, all the way up to the Bosporus and Dardanelles, and split it amongst the peoples of the region. Now, the Russians saw no problem with that. These are Slavic peoples they're freeing. And then somebody would try to explain to them, well, what about the Slavic peoples in your own empire? Yeah, what about them? We'll keep, don't worry, we're not freeing them from a Christian ruler, we're freeing them from a Muslim ruler. Totally different, right? So let's do this, guys. And the Austrians are going, not on your life. You start talking crazy about everybody getting free. The Romanians are going to go back to Romania. The Serbs are going to go to Serbia. All our Croatians are going to want to break away, and the Hungarians, and the worst of all, the Italians. Northern Italy was contributing a huge amount of GDP to Austria. I think it was like 25% of Austria's GDP was coming out of Northern Italy. They could not afford to lose those provinces, not one bit. And they're already having trouble keeping them in the stable of nations there. So the Austrian response to Russia was, no, don't do this. And as France and England mobilized to go to support the Ottoman Empire and, again, keeping Russia out of things, the French wanted to get some leeway with things in here and there. The British did not want the Russians to get into Turkey because there's this part over here that will lead towards Persia and that goes towards India. They don't want that to happen. This is part of the Great Game. Well, they're mobilizing armies to actually go to war with Russia. Austria inserts itself and just mobilizes and puts them along the frontier because the Russians had moved to occupy Moldavia and Wallachia. And the Austrians were like, no, you get your armies out of there, demilitarize the entire Danube region. No war should be fought here. And we're serious. If you don't get out, our mobilized army will ally itself with the French and the British, and we will be at war with you. And the Austrians also had a treaty they had signed with Prussia that if Austria went to war with Russia, Prussia would join in. The Prussians didn't like that once they saw what Austria was doing. They just thought they were signing a mutual defense treaty. And they're going, what, what's going on? What's Russia doing? Sure, yeah, we'll protect you. And then when they realized it's a French and British move that's going to draw Austria in, the Prussians were not happy with that. And that brings me to another thing that needs to be in Victoria 3. As we do diplomatic plays, there needs to be a way that the play keeps going even after hostilities start. That other nations can make demands that they will get into the war if something isn't taken care of. And in this case, Austria said demilitarized the Danube. And that led to the Russian armies, they had been fighting with the Turks, to break off the fighting and retreat north of the Danube area, get out of Moldavia and Wallachia. The Austrian armies moved in. Then as Turkish armies moved to police the area, the Austrian armies then moved out. And once the Austrian armies moved out, they were able to demobilize, which was a relief to the Austrians because they couldn't afford that. Now that is accurate in Victoria 3. We do see wars becoming very expensive. Thumbs up for that. That's a great move there. The Austrians couldn't handle the mobilization. They were glad to get people out. They were glad that there was no war immediately along their edges. For their part, the Prussians looked at this and they did not like what the Austrians were doing at all. They didn't like what the British or French were doing. They also didn't like what the Russians were doing. And they realized that if they pick a side, if they join up with the Russians, then they're going to be attacked by the French and the British, and they will lose the Rhine to the French for sure. If they sided with the French and the British, then the Russians would come plowing into their Polish area, and they didn't want to take any more Poland or anything from Russia. They would have no demand from Russia, and the brunt of the war would be on them. They did not like that. So the Prussians maintained a principled neutrality that soured everyone on them. And that should be another thing where if you don't join a diplomatic play, then that should damage relationships with the players in the play. Just all of them. If you don't join the play, then all of them will not like you by a certain amount. That should be in there. Well, anyway, so that's how the Austrians handled the Crimean War. Towards the end of the Crimean War, the French leader Louis Napoleon, or Napoleon III, was getting some ideas that the Crimea had fallen, or Sevastopol had fallen, and the French army and the British army were strong, and the Turkish army was holding things well enough on its own frontier. The French said, what if we got Sweden involved? We could then give Sweden all of Finland and the Åland Islands, and then we can redraw the map of Europe, give Courland to Prussia, we can give Poland to Austria, and we'll cut Ukraine off, and we'll do all kinds of things. Any power that wants stuff, we'll give it to them. Well, we'll just slice Russia up, just cut all kinds of bits off of them. How about that? The British thought, no, because we have places in the world that we would rather not have sliced off of us. And if they see the slicing going on, they will rise up in rebellion. India, which actually has a massive revolution in 1857. The British called it the Sepoy Mutiny. The Indians called it their first war of revolution. So it swept the continent, and it was massive. The British know that this is going on. It's bubbling over. They do not want to lose India. It's very important for their industrial concerns. And I should say why. The British are taking lots of natural resources out of India and then using those natural resources to build up things in England and then sell those goods back to the Indians. India is a massive flow of money into England. They don't want that. They do not want redrawing of borders. The Prussians do not want redrawing of borders. The Swedes do like the idea of getting Finland. They're all for that. Like, yeah, we'd love to have Finland back. Yes, sir. They're okay there. The Austrians, no, they don't like that either. They said the whole reason we didn't fight was so that way the borders would stay the same, that the balance of power would stay the same. If Russia is weakened, then something is going to fill that gap. Something will fill the emptiness that is created as Russia is weakened and retreats. And Austria was worried that Germany would be the one to fill that area out, not Austria. Austria was straining at the limits. Prussia was not. So they don't want to have that grow either. That's the Crimean War, and why it didn't result in a dismemberment of Russia, but just very slight border adjustments and little codicils and so forth. Russia agreed to those before Sweden entered the war, and that's why Finland didn't go back to Sweden. The Russians caved in before any other demands could be added. But again, this talks to the need to have the capability to add additional demands to a war and maybe have a time period where they don't become active. Or rather, if the defeat becomes more complete, we can then demand these other things, but we could end the war now with just the original demands. Something like that, some system like that. If you're a Paradox developer on Victoria 3, I hope you're listening and you could have some influence amongst your colleagues to work on this and make it a new mechanic within the diplomatic plays and wars. Add new goals. And maybe that is coming out, but I just want to say it here. Anyway, all of that explains why Austria wanted to maintain the concert of Europe. And that if Metternich was out, that something would be causing them to think that they need to expand. And even though their army is turned inward, all their focus is turned inward, and that was the whole detour into the Crimean War to explain that inwardness of Austria, what would then make them think that they have to reach out and take Germany, or at least assert dominance over Germany? And that would be maybe because, again, Metternich is out, the emperor feels he must make some kind of strength, some kind of declaration of strength, that he's worried that, well, we do have a French Republic here in this game, and that could be potentially revolutionary. Who's running this republic? Let's take a look. Democratic Republic. This is not a republic of the rich elites. This is, they've got trade unions in the government, they've got intelligentsia, they've got the rural folk. This is revolutionary. Look at their policies. Professional army, total separation. France is a Catholic nation, and they've got total. And you can't see total separation because it's behind my head here, but I'm telling you, they've got total separation, and, and universal suffrage and a parliamentary republic, tenant farmers. Well, okay, that's not a big threat, but still, that total separation. Louis Napoleon comes into power because he says he will rule France as a Catholic monarch, and he puts guarantees on the papacy. This it interferes with how Italy reunites itself. But we have this republic here. And while we're at it, what are France's relationships? Well, looks like they have a potential friend in Sardinia, Piedmont. And what's the relationships? Well, France doesn't have anything going on with them. They do have a let's see here. Whoops, sorry. They're improving relations with Germany, and they have a rivalry with England and the U.S. Not too bad there, but they definitely do have back here a potential ally here with Sardinia, and Sardinia is active in agitating for unification of Italy, which means Austria losing its Italian stuff. And while we're at it, let's just take a look at the global GDP here. Yeah, that's 6.5% and 6.1%. So this is 12% of Austria's GDP, 1/8 of Austria's GDP. That's a bit low. So, well, different things have happened. Bohemia's been built out more than Italy. I get it. But still, this is a very important economic region for Austria. 1/8 of its GDP is right there. And if France makes friends with Sardinia Piedmont to weaken Austria, and they might want to do that because Austria was active in weakening France, they could lose some things there. So by projecting strength into Germany, Austria would then have, if they have dominance over Germany, it would be mostly the little Germanys here that could help it in going against the French. Getting all of the South German areas brought into Austria would make them stronger, and they would be able to threaten France directly on its Rhenish frontier here with Alsace and Lorraine. So if France did get active in the Piedmont region, Austria would have that counterweight there. And if it was able to actually weaken Prussia enough to make it a protectorate or break off parts or something, then Austria would be able to actually create the Großdeutschland and bring all of that northern Germany into the southern Germany into the Austrian Empire, and hopefully use the power there of a larger German population to weigh down on the potential rebelliousness of its other ethnic groups and provide more soldiery to keeping Italy secure. So maybe that's the calculation that's going on. Maybe that's what drives Austria to make that play. We will assert ourselves. And maybe the Austrian play was not meant as an act of war, that they did mobilize. But that's a bluff. They went up and said, we are going to mobilize. Prussia, you should know your place. You belong as you're second rank to Austria. Austria will run Germany. Prussia will help us run Germany. And then the rest of Germany will respect the power of Austria with its assistant Prussia. You dig? You understand what we're saying here? And just trying to make that push, because the Austrian army in this game was larger than the Prussian army at that time of attack. And that's why, as playing Prussia, I saw the need to have as good a relationship with all the other major European powers, because the Russian and British support proved critical in acting as that counterweight. Now, I did make demands because I thought if we go to war, I'm taking a bunch of Austria. And in fact, demanding Bohemia was good because we saw that's 12% of Austria's GDP. And we could say that Austria would back away from that after realizing with those other two great powers, three against one, and France is on the sidelines, but France is not quite on the sideline if it's willing to back Sardinia in a play to get Italy pried off. This is where the Austrian emperor and his staff would realize that they've made an overreach, that the ghost of Metternich is haunting them, and that they've got to back out. They've got to drop down and get out of the way. But then the consequence is not just return to the status quo. No, the consequence is Prussia will now be the dominant leader, and because Prussia didn't add any other demands to that, they were dropped. Only the primary demand that Prussia has primacy over the Germanies, that was granted. All right, and even though Bayern was willing to join with Austria, now that's part of the deal. They owe their allegiance to Prussia. So that gets us through that part. Now for what happened here in Schleswig-Holstein. All right, well, we know what happened in the game. The Denmark backed down and said, you can have Holstein right away. Before I even made another demand, it says, take it. Ooh, so is that realistic? It, well, Denmark always felt that Schleswig was more a part of Denmark than was Holstein. And that the whole idea that Schleswig and Holstein have to stay together as part of some ancient deal, it never. The Danes were always going, like, why do we have to respect this thing from several hundred years ago? Can't come on? It's 18 something right now. Can't we just redo the whole thing? It's 600 years later. What's the deal? But if you're going to be nationalist, if you're going to be romantic about your patriotism, the Germans are all going, no, you can't have them separated. It's a deal. It's no, you can't just. These are laws. You can't just because you're the head of a government doesn't mean you can sweep a law aside. When actually, yeah, you kind of can. And so, but the idea being that if the Danish monarch dies and a female inherits the throne, then under Salic law, Schleswig and Holstein should revert to the House of Oldenburg. Well, in this move, it was the way I asked for it as Prussia was like, I would like Holstein to be released from Denmark. I didn't ask for the territory. I just said they should be released. And Denmark agreed to that. So that splits it out. Denmark now keeps Schleswig, which satisfies the Danish nobility. They didn't have to give up the part that they didn't want to give up. They gave up the part that they didn't really care about. Does it satisfy the Germans? Well, it seems like it has satisfied them temporarily. Because they agreed to it, I don't have a war. And suddenly the whole journal entry gets completed and the North German Federation comes together. All right. Although I could see some realism in Denmark surrendering Holstein, especially after Germany is given authority over, or especially after Prussia is given authority over all of Germany, can't use them interchangeably. I keep trying to, but I can't. So Prussia is given authority all over Germany. It may make sense to the Danish monarch. Let's throw him a bone. If we give him Holstein, they won't come asking for Schleswig. Let's just let that happen. And it's a bit of a sop, and it works. There's no war. Denmark probably felt that it was isolated because Russia and England had recently supported Germany in the fight against Austria. And maybe Russia and England are looking at Germany now as acting as a counterweight to Austria, because let's take a look at Austrian relations here. Austria has a rivalry, already had the rivalry with Germany. Now it has a rivalry with Britain. And so the British would like to have something act as an ally for them against Austria. And indeed, as Prussia, I'm working on my relationship with England. I'd like to have as good a relationship with them as possible. There seems to be something natural there. We don't share borders. We could both benefit from a weaker France and a weaker Russia. England does not want to see Russia extend into the Far Eastern regions. So the way the game is right now, it does make sense for England to step back and let Germany take a little bit of Denmark. Russia could also benefit there as well. It seems like it's inevitable that the Germanys are going to form. And this is not a crown from the gutter situation either. The crown from the gutter was the German parliament in Frankfurt, and this is the German Confederation Parliament in Frankfurt in 1848, basically had a bunch of nationalist fervor, and they told the king of Prussia, and he was Frederick Wilhelm IV, we will make you emperor of all of Germany. We're going to vote you in. And Kaiser Friedrich Wilhelm was feeling like, no, that I don't want you to vote me in as king. That's a bad precedent. I want the other monarchs to say that they would like me to be their king or emperor or whatever, but not some parliament doing this, because that's way too French Revolution-y for me. I don't need this. I will not take you guys who think you have power. He basically, when he said, I will not accept a crown from the gutter, he's saying that, these guys are from the gutter. They're they're not nobles. They don't have the noble blood within them. How dare they? So he refused that honorific. He refused to receive that power there. But there were still leanings within these other nations that Germany should be formed. And over time, they asked the question, who should be running Germany? Should it be one of the middle states like Hanover, like Saxony, like Bavaria, Württemberg? And they felt like, well, no, they don't really have the gravitas. They've got armies and stuff, but they're mostly local forces. Because the Prussians had modernized their army, they were seen as something worth of emulation. And also because the Prussians had industrialized, and even though they still had a monarch that was very much an absolutist, it wasn't entirely absolutist. They still had voting systems that, although they favored the rich, most voting systems in Europe favor the rich. But it meant that if you didn't have something you were born with, the noble blood, you could still go out and earn a lot of money, and that opportunity would allow you to have the power shared with the nobility. And that was seen as forward-looking, as liberal, as progressive. And so the common people, the shopkeepers, the middle classes, the nouveau riche, all of those felt that that was a better way of doing things. And the Prussians were doing it. So it didn't matter to them whether it was Prussia or Hanover or Bavaria. Whichever monarch was being liberal, they were all ready to get behind them. And if Prussia was doing that and had modernized an army and had the capability of defending a united Germany, that Prussian military system was seen as superior to the other military systems, then they would join in with it. And why did they join in with the Prussian military system? Well, again, this is after the Second Schleswig-Holstein War and the Austro-Prussian War, where Prussian military was clearly superior to the forces in the field. And that's what convinced other German monarchs to think, yeah, we should join up with Prussia. They still kept a lot of power within the German kingdom, or the North German Federation, but it was a Prussian-led one. If you think about the protectorate, dominion, puppet, unified level, this would be somewhere in between puppet and unified, but for game purposes, we're going to call it unification. Even though some of these states don't fully unify until well after 1871, for game purposes, they operate with the same foreign policy, the same trade policy. Their militaries are incorporated. That's good enough to be a unified country. So rather than make game mechanics that will add complexity that does nothing, I think the paradox developers made the right choice to just say that when Germany unifies, it unifies. It's one country, no puppet, nothing. It's done. I think we need some more finesse on Austria, especially when it becomes Austria-Hungary, because the Hungarian part of Austria-Hungary acted as a spoiler. It didn't behave well. It, it, it kept Austria from getting further. It kept Austria from ripping apart, but it also kept Austria from going forward. There should be complexity with Austria-Hungary, but not with the North German Federation or with the German Empire. They should stay as they are. Okay, so Germany now, uh, it dealt with Austria. It got Holstein carved away from Danish control, and then woof, the event fires to create the North German Federation, and it does. And even Schaumburg-Lippe a few days later joins in. Happy times. Holstein joined in as well. They wanted to be on the party, and now we have a larger nation that can direct more activity. Having played some smaller countries in Victoria 3, I really do see the wisdom in becoming a larger nation, and so did the governments of those smaller countries. They knew that they could not develop technically or industrially as little fiefs. That being part of a larger whole meant that all their strength would be corporatized. Uh-huh. Corporation is not just for an economic concept, it is a national concept. That's what the North German Federation is. It is a corporation of nations. They act together. Uh, I did a Greek playthrough, and I'll have some videos up on that at some point in the future. But playing as Greece, I wanted to build out my universities to max out my research level. I just didn't have enough population to do it and also generate money to pay for the universities. I could make all my technology and then just be this massive research center on the south end of the Balkan Peninsula and just not make home. I chose to make money instead and accept that my technology was going to be behind. But that North German Federation, all those universities come together, they add up, and now Prussia can research for the entire German Federation, or whatever areas are researching, they all chip in together. The production of different goods now unifies under one whole, so we don't have redundant buildings making artillery in small amounts. We can close down some of those non-productive factories and focus production in the ones that are best suited for the production of artillery. Same thing with small arms or machines or whatever it is that's there. We can now consolidate these things as a larger nation and have a population large enough to get an armed force and a education force to help propel the nation forward. You see, that's another thing that I had when I was playing Greece. I tried one move to take some provinces away from the Ottoman Empire, hoping that my great power allies would come to my rescue, and did not end well. You cannot wag the dog in Victoria 3 very easily. So that's why federating is a good idea for these smaller countries, because by pooling their power, as long as the elites are bought off, given their capabilities, whatever, that's fine for them. But as long as they are able to pool their power together, they become stronger and are now able to assert themselves. And geopolitically, having this North German Federation means if France comes in and knocks on the western door, all of Germany is there to defend. And if we look at the armed forces, yes, we now have 125, 252 total. That's a huge jump up. So instead of this army being disorganized and having to find a way to work under a common command in the event of an attack, and military exercises here already showed that that wasn't going to work out well, they now have a unified command. They have a standardized military system, a good one. And if we go with that 1867 idea and translated here to this 1845 one, technically, as Germany, I did, or as Prussia, I did build out my army more. I did modernize it somewhat as a result of the war with Austria, or the threatened war with Austria. And with that modernization, with that strength there, the rest of the North German countries would see, yes, unifying with Germany does make sense. Austria made that grab. Someone's going to grab us. Let it be a Prussian nation that understands the way we operate, how we are more industrial, economic focused, and industrially focused, whereas Austria is not industrially focused. It is agriculturally focused. It is still trying to preserve an empire of the 18th century, and here we are in the 19th century. Prussia gets it. Prussia's modernizing. Prussia is industrializing. It's allowing people with money to come into governing power to advance themselves socially. It gets it. They're much more comfortable with that. So I can now see that, yes, this does make sense historically. Now, if Germany adds other provinces, what do we get there? Well, it may be that if Germany expands out towards the west, France will be upset with that, but the British might be willing to let that happen if the Germans have a solid claim on anything. But if they don't, they're going to oppose it. They might, we'll see. Definitely, if Germany has that next war with Austria, and it will, if and when that happens, how will the other nations feel about that? Especially if Germany actually takes territory from Austria. They may be outraged by it, but they also may be at a point where they realize that they cannot directly attack Germany. Or they may be outraged by it, but once it's done, they may say, well, what's done is done. Some of them may retain a outrage and declare rivalry and seek to weaken Germany. But there may be another power or two powers that are willing to make a common cause with Germany because they have shared opponents. Part of the art of diplomacy is not holding a grudge. There's more than one anecdote about some statesman saying never, and then the foreign policy guy walks in and says, "Oh, wow, why are you using never in a foreign policy discussion? That's just not right." No. Never say never, because you may just don't do that. Even though I may have major powers oppose further German territorial expansion, once it's done, they may realize they have a common cause and that they'll be glad they never said never. So that's a historian reacts. Having done this, having talked through it, I think I feel better about the history in this game. I can now see a situation. Metternich is out of the picture. Austria wanted to flex to keep the French out of Italy and maybe to keep its own people in line by usurping more power over Germany. And it backfired on them. Prussia was able to assert itself through its alliances. And because of that, the rest of the North German nations saw that Prussia is going to be the way forward. Because if it's not Prussia, it's going to be France or Austria, and they would much rather have Prussia do their job. It's more business friendly than the wackos in France who are almost starting a revolution, or the backward looking Austrians. That's the explanation, and I'm sticking with it. All right, those of you who asked for a longer video, you got it. 59 minutes. And I did not unpause once. Just clicked on the map. I hope you like, comment, and subscribe after I go through all this. And I will be happy to see you in the next video where we do unpause and we have Germany deal with some more territorial expansion. Until next time, this is the historian that reacts to the Economist playing, saying, I hope all your diplomatic plays go the way you want them to, and that you can find a historically plausible explanation for them. Cheers.